Hi, I'm Tommy Everett, son of Leroy Everett. I'd like to tell you a bit of a backstory about the historic Everett's Music Barn here in Swanee, Georgia. The music has been a big part of Everett's Music Barn, but there's also a sad story that it's always been part of the barn. A tragic event happened here in Gwinnett County 50 years ago this year, April 17th, 1964. The Gwinnett County Police Department was in its infancy. It only had 12 officers at the time, 2 officers per car, because there was very little radio communication. So, an officer came sick at the Swanee exit during a car fire, and so my Uncle Jerry Everett picked up the fellow officer, and that put 3 officers in the police car. They took a call to a disturbance down on Arkway in Duluth off Beaver Run Road. They went to the call down there. The next morning, when Ray Sexton got to work, he noticed my uncle's car was still there, along with one of the other officers' car was still there the next morning, and he wondered why their car was there. And they said, we haven't heard from them all night. So they go back to the previous call at Arkway in Duluth, and what they found when they got there was a burnt 1963 Oldsmobile was sitting there. It had been burnt. The police car was there running, but the wires were torn out of it, but there was no bodies, nothing to be found. They couldn't figure out what happened. They assumed that they put the officers in the trunk of the car and burned them. So they sent for a crowbar. They pried the trunk open, no officers. This happened early that morning. Along about 9 or 10 o'clock later in the morning, Ray Sexton, which is still a family friend and alive today, was a fellow officer and my Uncle Jerry Everett's best friend. Had to use the restroom. He walked about 100 yards up the wood trail to use the restroom. And when he was turned to walk away, he almost stepped on the bodies and started screaming. The 3 officers were handcuffed together, back to back, and shot over 20 times with their own pistols. What a gruesome sight that had to be. All the police in the area swarmed in there. They couldn't understand why would somebody kill 3 officers, and how could you get the drop on 3 policemen? It was a very, very difficult case. This case went on for around 14 months before they found out what happened. It was a terrible time. People would gather here at the music barn to help soothe the family, because as old men would sit around the table and they would say, who's heard what? Who's heard anything? The lady told a story later in the book. There's a book out, The Judas Deputy, involving the case. And she told in the book that she was here the morning of April 18th. Everybody left the crime scene and came back here, and all the men sat around the table. My dad Leroy was a World War II veteran, so everybody looked to him for strength. And she told us tale, being a young girl, about making coffee for the men, and just kept coffee for the men, and they all sat around the kitchen table, which is still in there now. And she said a distinct man came in the door and put his hands on my dad's shoulders and said, Leroy, you find the SOB and I'll kill him for you. And so he was very instrumental in trying to help the family through this 14-month hiatus, try to help find who murdered them. It was just a terrible time. There was only one GBI assigned to the case, so the detectives and the surrounding officers had to put their brain power together and try to come up with a way to solve one of the worst crimes in Georgia history.
But we're going to do an old traditional song, Lonesome Road Blues.
so when my Uncle Jerry leaned over in the car to see the damage, Alec Evans pulled his pistol out and shot him in the hip. So he had Jerry. So when the other officers came back down the gravel road, they got the other bad guy out of the back of the car. Excuse me. When they got him out of the back of the car and approached Jerry and Alec, Alec put the gun to Jerry's head and said, "Drop your guns and I'll shoot, or I'll shoot." So they dropped their guns, of course. Even to this day, in the police academy here in Georgia, they kind of teach this same scenario. What do you do if a fellow officer pulls a gun and sticks it to an officer's head? What do you do in that scenario? You don't drop your guns. These three officers dropped their guns to save a fellow officer. And they took them out in the woods, handcuffed them, and brutally murdered them. And that's how they were able to get the drop on three officers. This year in April, we had a 50-year ceremony for these fallen heroes. We had the entire Gwinnett County Police Force here, along with surrounding cities sent officers, over 100 police cars in the ceremony. We had dignitaries from all over the South. We got cards and letters from all over, because this touched the entire state and the Southeast United States. It touched the entire police force along with its family. And so this is 50 years later, and this tragedy is still reflected. It's one of the worst crimes in Georgia history. And out of that comes this place where these people gather every Saturday. Some of them drive 80 to 100 miles every week to visit this place because they know of its rich heritage and what it took to get it here.
Are we ready?
I'm ready. Y'all ready?
Ready, Sarge.
Put your hands together and make welcome the Everett Family Band.